Good evening. About a month ago, I received a call from an unknown number. Should I pick up or let it go to voicemail? The number didn't look too familiar, so I figured probably not spam. I picked up. "Hi, Chaya," the voice began. "You don't know me, but I want to ask you a favor." "Okay." "We are planning an event about Bitachon," she continued, "and we thought maybe you could share your story." Turns out, it seems the last time I spoke at an event in that other room was somewhat successful. They're actually asking me back. But wait, Bitachon? I mean, I don't really have a story, I told her. I'm just a regular mom with 5 kids, 5 and under, and I blog about it. Okay, maybe that's not so regular. But really, there's no fascinating story going on here, and I'm certainly not a scholar. That's exactly what we want, she insisted. We want to hear from a regular girl like you who can share her journey of Bitachon. I told her I'd think about it. Bitachon? Was that what my story was about? Maybe there was something to that. Having many children close in age is not the most common family pattern today, for various reasons. And doing something uncommon like that takes courage. For me, this became a conscious choice after child number 4. I needed to find that courage, that strength to continue to do what seemed radical somehow to many around me. And so I began a search for sources, for an intellectual, spiritual, and emotional basis that I could rely on. And I found it. I searched in the places I knew it would be, and my search was amply rewarded. The answer was so beautiful, so powerful, and so strong. The only thing I couldn't understand was why others didn't seem to see it. What was it? How is it that something so clear to me was all but invisible to those around me? I realized that it was more than just reading words from a book. There was a reason this message, the message which ultimately came down to practical Bitachon, spoke to me in a way that it may not have reached others, even those who read the same words as I did. I realized there was a history. I did have a story that went back some 20 plus years to when I was a little girl. It was a journey that brought me to where I am today, to make the choices that I did, to start my blog, and ultimately to stand here today. I was a very sensitive child, and I used to think a lot. That can be an intense combination. When I was young, I had a lot of fears. I remember lying in bed at night and hearing noises from the street, and fearing that a burglar was breaking into the house. Crown Heights in those days, as some of you might remember, was not the safest neighborhood. And every incident I heard about lived on in my imagination. I had other, more ridiculous fears. Bridges and tall buildings, trees and branches could collapse any moment and fall on my head. Dogs were about to bite, and cats were ready to pounce. You could say I was somewhat anxious. But I was also thinking, and my brain would tell me that although these things happen, it wasn't so likely it would happen to me. And when the fears came over me, I might quietly sing to myself, Hashem is here, Hashem is truly everywhere. Other times, I would repeat the words of Shema. I knew from what I was taught that only Hashem could protect me, and while sometimes I couldn't stop my instinctive reactions, I absorbed it all, and I told myself there was no one that could really protect me but Hashem. So I was afraid, but in general, my Yiddish education worked for me, and I coped. As I grew older, I learned more about the world, and my fears got more sophisticated and realistic. I began to understand the risks in driving, and while we didn't drive a lot living in Crown Heights, I was often fearful when we did. I had a close relative who was terribly hurt in a car accident when I was very young. And I remember vividly the crash in the Catskills some 16 years ago, when 3 people lost their lives in a collision with a truck. Ever since then, passing a truck on the road was a heart-stopping experience. And there were more fears. I learned about the Holocaust, the Crusades, the Khorban, and I understood how cruel people could be. I realized that many Jews in the past suffered terribly at the hands of others, with no chance of escape. And I knew that it's foolish to believe that today was different. They were comfortable then, just as we are comfortable now, until one day it all turned over on them. I knew that we live in a very scary world. At this point, the knowledge of Hashem's presence wasn't enough for me, because Hashem was present when all these other people were hurt too. Why would it be any different now? This is a hard question for anyone to live with, but for a sensitive child, it can be very destructive. There were times that I didn't feel safe walking in the street. Every abrupt movement was suspicious. Every sound put me on alert, and every passersby had me moving as far away as possible, as if that small distance could somehow protect me. This wasn't a constant feeling, but something that became more acute each time I heard of an incident or read a difficult book. And I read a lot. Thank you. I began to search for answers. I needed to understand our faith. How did a Jew go on believing in Hashem, in the Torah, and doing what Hashem wanted, when the good results we'd expect so often didn't come through? My teachers didn't seem to have the answers for me. We don't understand the ways of Hashem, they might have said, or we just have to do our part. I wasn't asking for promises, but it had to add up somehow. If Torah is the truth, there should be explanations. Maybe most other people didn't deal with the fears that I did, or they just didn't think about it. But I did, and I needed to be fully confident in my faith, to know what was right and what was wrong, and what was really the truth. I was searching for confidence, not for people living the life because that's how they were raised, because it felt right, or because it was comfortable, but for people who did what they did because they knew that it was right. It wasn't a sudden realization, but looking back today, there was one thing that really did it for me. I was born in 1991, 3 years before Gimel Tammuz, so I don't remember meeting the Rebbe, although I was lucky enough to receive a few dollars when I was a little baby. I'm sure that had a strong effect, but that's not what I remember. Throughout my life, I saw many videos of the Rebbe, and as I got older, I learned his sichos and read many of his letters, particularly as they are compiled in books about faith. And I discerned something there that I found nowhere else in my world. I found true confidence. The Rebbe was very smart, and I knew a few smart people, but the more I learned and heard about the Rebbe, the more obvious it became that the Rebbe was far smarter than them. The Rebbe knew all areas of Torah inside out and quoted from them seamlessly. He spoke multiple languages, even as a young child. He was well-versed in many secular fields, including math and science, enough that he was known to correct and offer insight to many experts in those fields. Nobody could deny that the Rebbe knew a lot more than most. The Rebbe didn't have an easy life. He barely escaped war-torn Europe, where he lost close family members and thousands of others that he knew. And as a Rebbe, he heard daily about the troubles of thousands of people who turned to him. He knew what suffering was. And yet, he made it very clear that he didn't think it was a contradiction. Over and over, the Rebbe told us, the Torah is emes. Hashem is the only true power. Every word in Torah is b'diuk, perfect and precise. That was the first piece of the puzzle. I had not yet found answers to my questions, but I had found someone who had them. I had found a basis for my faith. I no longer felt that I was following what I was taught blindly, just because I was born into this particular religion and community. I wasn't just following my friends and neighbors and doing what they did because they did it. Now I had upon whom to rely. Vayaminu b'Hashem u'v'Moshe avdei. The Yidden learned their faith in Hashem through their faith in Moshe. And this was true today too. Hashem gave us a Rebbe to lead us and show us truth, to show us in the form of a human being that it does truly add up. A human being could live in this world and stay connected to Hashem, could live with tremendous suffering and still not give up on one iota of what Hashem wants and expects from him. It wasn't naivete or blind faith. It was true confidence. As I matured, and without consciously realizing, my anxieties began to relax, and any doubts that I had in my faith all but disappeared. I was still collecting answers and finding meaning and explanations. I probably will always be, but I had seen the confidence, and now I could be patient, realizing that big, deep questions don't get answered on one foot. And as the Rebbe wrote in his letters, just as we don't have to understand the workings of a medicine to use it for healing, we need not understand the meaning behind every mitzvah in Torah in order to fulfill it and allow it to bring blessing into our lives. I could not express in the time that we have everything that I learned and now understand, but I will focus on a few ideas that I feel built the foundation of Bitachon that I lean on today. I'll begin by defining the two basic terms: Emunah, which means faith or belief, and Bitachon, which means trust. Believing in Hashem, or Emunah, to me was fairly simple. I'd open up to any random page in my biology book or take a walk in the park. I'd see how much order and sense lived in nature. And I knew without a doubt there was a most brilliant creator behind it. I felt him too when I went out into nature. I could never get over how simply beautiful and calming every aspect of the natural world is, especially in contrast to the industrial world of human invention. Certainly, there was a truly great artist behind it all. But the next step, of trusting in Hashem or Bitachon, well, that took a lot more understanding. One could trust someone with a record. A person who is known to have always told the truth could be trusted as an honest person. A person who always shows up on time could be trusted to be timely. A person who is regularly calm and gentle could be trusted to continue to behave that way. But someone who does not have such a record, more so has a record of cheating, well, how could you trust him to be faithful? We are told to trust in Hashem, not to believe in an abstract way, but to actually rely on his attribute of goodness and kindness in every situation in our life. Bitachon is belief that you can act upon. This is where it becomes complex, because Hashem does not only do one job. Hashem does not have one face, and he does not have one way of operating. Hashem is not a human being with one defined form that can be labeled one way or another. Learning Chassidus really reinforces this, teaching us not to see Hashem as an uncaring and strict ruler that enacts judgments on his subjects. Chassidus tells us that Hashem is everything. This world, the next world, myriads of spiritual worlds that exist simultaneously, and yet still every atom of matter in this world that we live in. Hashem is everything, and Hashem directs everything. But everything in this world is not just one type of thing. There are good things in this world, many good things. There are difficult things too, many of which ultimately show themselves to be good in the long run. And then there are those unfathomably painful and evil things in this world that never seem to justify themselves at all. Some of these things are caused by nature, others by human beings, some intentionally and some by accident. And this is all Hashem. So how can we trust? What are we trusting? How do we know what kinds of things will befall us if we experience all three types of things in this world, in our time in this world, what is to tell us that our fate will be the good things when the fate of so many, and perhaps even ourselves in the past, has been otherwise? I remember as a child watching a video of the story of the Tana, Nachum Ish Gamzu. He lived in the time period directly after the Churban, when relations between the Jews and their Roman rulers were very strained. At one point, he was appointed as their messenger and sent to the Caesar with a case loaded with gold and precious jewels. It was a long journey, and on one of his stops to rest, his hosts stealthily swapped out the treasures for a load of dirt. Think about it. He was carrying the personal valuables of thousands of hardworking Jews in the hopes of winning the favor of their difficult ruler. And now, it was all gone. Any sane person would lose his mind, possibly have a heart attack, and certainly stop his trip. Yet, when Nachum discovered this further on in his journey, he was not fazed in the least. Gamzu l'taiva, he said, this too is for the good. And knowing he was on a mission, he continued on to the Caesar. When he arrived, he presented his gift of dirt, which was received with the rage that one could expect for such an offering. He was immediately banished and sentenced to death. But then Hashem sent Eliyahu Hanavi in the form of a close minister who suggested that the Caesar think deeper and informed him that the dirt was magical dirt that would win his battles for him, like the dirt of Avram Avinu in his battle with the four kings. This, he insisted, was an even greater treasure than all of the jewels in the world. The Caesar ordered it immediately put to the test, and the words of his minister proved true. It was an unbelievable miracle. Not only was a terrible catastrophe averted, as the Caesar would certainly not stop at Nachum, but punish all those who sent him, meaning the Jews. But the same act that seemed to bring on the catastrophe was the very act that brought them great fortune. The Caesar was now indebted to the Jewish community, and their mission was far more successful than they could have ever dreamed. Gamzu l'taiva, this too, this devious act that should have had disastrous consequences, is actually good. This story, and other stories like it, had a mixed message for me. On the one hand, they illustrated how there can be situations when human reason cannot fathom a good outcome, and yet Hashem has it all worked out. It gives hope that when solutions seem impossible, Hashem has our back. Certainly a powerful and comforting thought. Yet, at the same time, this story is clearly told as a reflection of the pious character of the Tana Nachum, who was clearly far beyond the level of the average man, even in his time. So on that level, I felt, it's no reassurance that we can expect a similar fate in our lives. The Rebbe once shared this story in an address to his Chassidim. He then compared it with a famous story of Rabbi Akiva, a Tana of the next generation and a student of Nachum Ish Gamzu. Rabbi Akiva was traveling with the basic necessities of a scholarly traveler of his day: a donkey to carry his belongings, a rooster to wake him at midnight for his studies, and a candle to light the pages. But as he approached a particular town to settle down for the evening, he was beset by all sorts of troubles. No one would allow him in to sleep in the entire town, and he was forced to settle down in the field outside the village. This itself led to an unfortunate series of events, as his candle was quickly blown out by strong winds, his donkey attacked by a lion, and his rooster devoured by a cat. He was left all alone in the dark wilderness, without even his basic necessities. Yet, Rabbi Akiva said, Kol da'avid rachmana l'tav avid. Whatever Hashem does is for the good. Morning came with a frightening discovery. The nearby town where he'd asked for refuge had been overrun by bandits, the townspeople taken into captivity. His life had been spared by being refused lodging, and by the fact that there was no light from his candle or noisy animals to give him away. Also, an amazing miracle. The Rebbe makes an interesting distinction between the two stories. Nachum Ish Gamzu expressed his faith in Hebrew, in the elevated holy language usually reserved for study. And this reflected itself in the form of the miracle that came forth from his faith. It was beyond the natural order, astoundingly great, in a way that even the misfortune itself, the loss of the jewels, was transformed into an incredible gain, the miracle dirt that won wars. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, was known for his Aramaic expression. Kol da'avid rachmana letav avid. Everything Hashem does is for the good. Aramaic was the language spoken by the ordinary folk. And so, while he too merited a tremendous miracle, it was more ordinary, expressed through natural events. The loss of his personal possessions, while far outweighed by the gain of sparing his life, remained a loss for the purpose of a greater good, yet a loss. And then, in the Rebbe's typical manner, he continues. Of course, since we know that Hashem is truly only good, and only good can come from him, the only difference here is in revelation. The generation of Nachum Ish Gamzu was more righteous, directly following the times of the Beis Hamikdash, and so they merited to see more clearly the good and kind ways of Hashem. The next generation was already not so meritorious, and so some of their blessing was expressed in ways that still seem negative. This is what we are trusting. We are trusting that in fact, Hashem is truly good. And when things may not seem that way immediately, often they will turn around in unexpected ways, or rather, in ways that only Hashem could expect. As a sensitive teenager, I took this in. It gave me a sense of comfort, a feeling of hope in an uncertain world, while I still avoided walking under fire escapes for fear of them coming crashing down on my head. I was more relaxed in my awareness that even if it were to happen, it would turn out to be in my benefit, one way or another. Yet these two stories only address the first type of difficulties, like medicine that may be painful or uncomfortable in the short term, but ultimately serves to heal you. They are only temporary setbacks on a path to greater good. But then there are some troubles that really don't have explanations. Sure, they may cause you to grow as a person, but something like the loss of a loved one could never be described as a positive thing in itself. For this too, I needed some context, and for that there is one concept that spoke to me, which I will share in the form of a short story. There was a childless couple who came to the Baal Shem Tov begging for a blessing for a child. Clearly hesitating, the Baal Shem Tov finally agreed to their pleas, and he blessed them. Indeed, less than a year later, they were blessed with a beautiful baby boy. Yet their joy was short-lived, as after 2 short years, their child returned his soul to his maker. The couple returned to the Baal Shem Tov in terrible distress. "Why did you bless us?" they asked him. "Now we are in even greater pain, that we have tasted the sweetness of our child, only to lose him so soon after." The Baal Shem Tov felt their pain and offered them an explanation. "You were not destined to bear children," he said. Yet this was a lofty neshama that had completed its mission in the world through multiple lifetimes. But it had one lack that could only be remedied by being born into this world and nursing from a pure Jewish mother for 2 years. You were lucky enough to be chosen to receive this precious soul and bring it to its ultimate completion. Indeed, the parents were comforted, knowing that beyond their pain, there was another level of meaning in the loss that they suffered. Their precious child was a holy soul, and their connection to him had brought him to a far greater place. This story and others like it gave me that additional perspective, realizing that there are other realities that take their life from their actions and lives in this world, lends another, if somewhat abstract, possible layer of meaning. It is not a promise, but an awareness that things do add up, only sometimes in a different realm of existence. An existence that we may not be aware of now, but will ultimately come back to affect us. I think the final layer for me was how I learned to focus on my neshama, about how my life was not my body and what it experienced, but about my soul's journey in this world. This talked to me because I knew my body wasn't me. There was so much going on inside me that wasn't physical, so much that I knew and felt but couldn't necessarily explain. And that made sense. It made sense to me that good for the soul did not always feel good to the body. And this was not only a source of bitachon, but really a foundation for keeping all of Yiddishkeit. Doing Hashem's will is not always easy and does not always feel good, but feeling good is not the same as being good. I believe as these ideas found their place in my mind and my soul, they became who I am, and they took over most of my fears and anxiety that I lived with. Traces still remain, but overall I'm strong enough to keep them from anything more than flashing through my heart. My trust in Hashem and belief in Hashgacha Pratis gave me a strong sense of calm. I knew that Hashem was guiding my steps and only asking me to make the best decisions that I could within my particular circumstance. It was only with this trust that I was able to make serious decisions, like the choice to marry my husband or to buy our little house, because without it, I'd surely be paralyzed. How could you decide to marry a person, hopefully for life, when you know so little about them? And even when you get to know them more, you never know what the future holds. And who knows if they're truly the best person for you, that there isn't another guy out there who suits your needs better. I happen to think those are pretty valid questions, and no amount of meeting would really get that answer for you, because meeting isn't life. But I didn't go there, because I knew that it wasn't my place. It wasn't my job to predict the future, nor to worry about it. Hashem had guided me to that time and place, and I only needed to make the best decisions that I could with the tools and information that I had, and it would be good. But of course, that's not where my journey ends, because all of life is a journey, since Hashem wants to see us constantly learning and growing. Until now, I was dealing with decisions that primarily affected my life. But as a parent, suddenly there were so many more decisions that were not only mine, but affected the lives of all members in my family. This was a much more grave level of decision-making, which brings me to the next, more recent portion of my journey of Bitachon, and the one that brought me here today. As you know, I have 5 little children, Kenai Nahara. My oldest is 5. If that sounds like a lot to you, I agree, it is. A lot of kids, a lot of work, a lot of mess, and a lot of close, loving hearts sharing their lives in our little home. It was before my 4th was born that it started really hitting me. Is this normal, I started to think? Who has 4 kids in 4 years? Or 5 in 5, 6 in 6? How long will it go on? My mother, said the voice in my head. That's right, I am the 6th of 10 children born within 11 years. It may not be normal for others, but it should be normal for me, right? But there were questions in my head. Questions from inside, supported by questions from outside. Yes, other people were asking me what I was thinking. Everyone gets a heter today, they told me. It's better for kids to be more spaced apart. You need time to recover. I heard them, and I battled inside. Mothering is hard work. Mothering while pregnant and nursing is very hard work. Mothering multiple toddlers while pregnant and nursing? A recipe for disaster? But I liked having babies. I was healthy. My kids were amazing on every level, even if they cried and whined more than others could handle. They were mine, and they were so loved. And the battle raged on. When the days were more difficult, I leaned in one direction, and when all was quiet and calm, I reverted back. But I could not continue to live with questions like this. Questions that challenged the essence of my day-to-day life. Questions that threatened the validity of my biggest choices, the choices I made to allow another soul to enter my family. It was draining me of my drive at a time when I was caring for 3 little babies and carrying inside me a 4th. I truly needed my energy most. So I went searching for answers, and naturally turned to the place where I'd always found answers before. With a small amount of effort, I found a treasure trove of sichos and letters where the Rebbe spoke about having children. Building on the history that I had, on the background of complete and pure faith in the truth of the Torah and the goodness of Hashem, I took the Rebbe's words very literally. Society today talks of family planning as if the only civilized way to live is to plan out in advance the best number of children to have and when exactly to have them. The Rebbe argued against this strongly. We do not make our families better by denying the presence of a child that Hashem wants to send us, he insisted. Hashem gives us children, and he knows the best time for them to be born. Best for them, best for us, and best for their siblings. What struck me more than the novelty of these ideas was the confidence. Yiddishkeit has always valued the family, but few leaders would strongly proclaim these ideas in public. Perhaps it seemed to them that people had their reasons for keeping their families small, and it would not be right to interfere. But the Rebbe was not interfering. He knew the truth. He knew that aside from the truly valid issues, there were some people in situations not so different to mine. The issues then were the issues now. Nobody was against having children. All they said was that sometimes it was just too many, just too close. The Rebbe did not deny their concerns. Clearly, when a heter is called for, there are allowances in Torah. But the Rebbe urged us to think twice. He wanted us to refocus our interests and energies away from worrying about what the neighbors think, away from the temporary difficulty of dealing with crying babies, and into the long-term effects of what we were doing. We are bringing Hashem's children into the world and providing them the opportunity to live in his ways. He reminded us and promised that a child is never the source of negativity, but only a channel for more bracha, and that Hashem provided his people enough for their needs, according to their family size, and not despite it. I still don't have all the answers, but like with faith in general, I feel that I have upon whom to rely. I don't understand how finances are meant to work, with New York housing prices, school fees, groceries, and all the needs of a growing family on our average income. But the Rebbe promises us that the parnasa for the Jewish people is much like a deer skin. Apparently, when a deer is skinned, its hide shrinks to such a degree that it's impossible to see how it once fit around the body of an animal. Clearly, it is not meant to add up. Hashem has his ways of working and giving us exactly what we need in its right time, even if it's not in the way we might have planned or at the time we might have liked. And the Rebbe even took this one step further. A person must do all he can to make a physical kli for bracha in this world, he said. Yet, at a time when there are no practical options for a particular issue, whether it's financial or otherwise, doing the will of Hashem, even if it seems impractical, remains the appropriate course of action and is not considered relying on a miracle, which is otherwise forbidden. Bitachon is trust. It is not understanding an agreement, nor a legal contract with clear terms. It is simply relying on a firm belief that Hashem in his goodness has my best interests at heart, and all he asks from me is to choose good. Choose good, think good, and it will be good. Thank you.